Place. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for this community webinar on the topic Jewish Artists at the Princeton University Art Museum. I'm Mark Merkovitz, the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Princeton Mercer Bucks. The Federation is delighted to co-sponsor tonight's program with our partner, Jewish Community Foundation of Greater Mercer. Tonight's program will be a fascinating virtual tour through the museum's Henry Pearlman Collection. Before introducing our guest speaker, Sandy Kurinsky, let me explain tonight's format. Sandy will show us slides of various works of art and share information about them. If you have questions, please use the chat feature at the bottom of the screen at any time to submit your questions. And now I would like to introduce Amy Zaks, the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Foundation, who will introduce our guest speaker.
Thanks, Mark. I'm so glad that the Federation and the Foundation can co-sponsor on another interesting community program. Thank you so much. And I'm really honored and pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, Sandy Kurinsky, a longtime community member and friend of many local organizations in the Princeton area. I'm really pleased that she was willing to offer her expertise and time tonight. Sandy holds a bachelor's degree from Brandeis University and an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Since retiring from a 30-plus year career in business, Sandy's been involved in our local Princeton area community. She's a docent at the Princeton University Art Museum, and you may have seen her featured in their newsletter that came out last week. And she's current chair of the Art Museum's Docent Association. She also serves on the board of the Center for Modern Aging Princeton and previously chaired the steering committee of the Evergreen Forum, the teaching arm of CMAP. And now I'm really pleased to welcome Sandy.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everybody. As Amy said, I'm a docent at the Princeton University Art Museum. What I'm not is I'm not an art historian, but I've been trained to be a guide and to help people to look at art. If we were together in a small group, I'd be asking you a lot of questions rather than telling you a lot of things. So hopefully we'll get that opportunity next year when the museum actually opens. And so you don't have to put any questions about this in the chat. The museum is expected to open towards the end of 2025. James Stewart, our director, has put that in writing and he's spoken about it, so I feel very comfortable saying that to you now. So this evening, I'm going to share with you works of art, some by Jewish artists, from the collection of the late Henry and Rose Pearlman. And these works of art, there are 70 in the collection, have been on long-term loan to the Princeton University Art Museum since 1976. And I think I have 10 or 11 in what I'm going to show you. So let's talk a little bit about Henry Pearlman. Henry Pearlman was a lifelong New Yorker. He was born in 1895 and he died in 1974. And his was a rags to riches story. He was a self-made man, and he was the founder and CEO of Eastern Cold Storage. He had two passions, baseball and art. And his collection of Impressionist and Post-Impressionist art is one of the most distinguished collections in the United States. He started collecting in 1945, and he collected through the 70s. But most of his collecting was done in the first 10 years, as after that art became very expensive. And Pearlman bought what he loved, and he loved the process of purchasing art, the art of the deal. He bought art from many artists directly, as well as from galleries, and he was his own general contractor here. And his love for art was really visceral. It was based on his feeling about the work of art, and it was not intellectual. It wasn't based on the historical significance of the art or filling any particular holes in his collection. And what he says is he just got a lift from looking at the art that he loved. So he liked to discover hidden masterworks, and he called himself a one-track person in what he liked. He didn't like Picasso or the Cubists. He liked representational art, and he resisted the trend towards abstraction. And he lived with his collection. He had it in his home, he had it on his office walls, in his warehouse. Pearlman worshipped Cezanne, and that was the pivot of his collection. And that's sort of interesting to me because Cezanne's work was thought to be a key precursor to Cubism, and his painting influenced Cubists like Picasso and George Braque. So Pearlman saw himself as a custodian of great art, and he thought that anyone could develop a passion for fine art. He established a foundation to make art accessible, and his collection was initially on view at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. Now, this collection of 70 works of art has toured around the world. It's currently on a 3-year loan to the Muséum Granet in Aix-en-Provence. So if you happen to have a trip to the south of France planned, please stop in Aix-en-Provence and you'll be able to see this live. But anyways, the point here too is that Henry Pearlman and his family were also extraordinarily generous. So I want to start with a portrait of Henry Pearlman himself. This was done by Oskar Kokoschka, who was an Austrian who spent very little time in France, but he was recommended to Pearlman by an art dealer who was a mutual friend. Kokoschka was an expressionist painting, meaning he was a modernist who distorts the subject for emotional effect to evoke a certain mood. And we can see the broken brushstrokes here and the combination of the contrasting colors and the blues and yellows and the easy pose of the sitter, Henry Pearlman. His hands are resting comfortably on the arms of his chair. One of his hands is open, one is closed, and we see his bright blue eyes right in the center of this painting. And in the background on the right are his 2 daughters at a younger age. And Pearlman and Kokoschka actually developed a very warm friendship. Pearlman was not vain, however. When the painting was shown in a gallery, he asked that the title be Portrait of a Collector rather than Portrait of Henry Pearlman. So I think you can see here Pearlman's open and friendly personality, as well as his very kind smile. Now, his first purchase was the work of Chäim Soutine, and he saw this while he was walking around in New York, and he wanted it, so he made a deal to purchase it. This also started him on becoming a serious collector. He was also friends with Dr. Alfred Barnes of the Barnes Foundation, who made Soutine popular by purchasing most of his artwork. This was a clear case of supply and demand. So we're going to start our tour with a work of art by Edouard Manet. Manet was born in 1832. His parents were wealthy, unlike many of his contemporaries, and he was a bourgeois gentleman with high society connections, and he really understood the power of appearances. He was known as a transitional artist on the way from realism to impressionism. He didn't follow any tradition in his artwork, and he was one of the first to break away from classical art, and this is what inspired Impressionism. He used black extensively, as you can see, which the Impressionists did not. And he was very interested in painting everyday subjects, including the modern woman. He repeatedly presented his work to the Paris Salon, which was the vehicle to the art market, and he was continually rejected because he didn't conform to the Salon academic standards. So this is Young Woman in a Round Hat, a very descriptive title. It sort of hovers between portraiture and a painting of modern life. So the woman is not identified. Is she a model? Is she a well-to-do Parisian? We don't know. What I think we can say is she's very fashionably chic in her garment, but she also is awkward in her body. And she seems to be very aware of us looking at her. If you look at her left eye, she's sort of peering out of her veil, and her lips are lightly pursed. She has a fancy outfit on. You can see all of the brush strokes, the horizontal strokes in the background, and horizontal strokes also in her outfit. And on her hat, you can see the veil. It's pretty delicate, incongruous with some of her features, almost serving as a mask. So if we look at some of her features, she has a strong nose with a wide nostril. She has an ample chin and jowl, a thick neck, the shadow of a sideburn beneath that veil, and very large hands, which are in black gloves. And people have said that some of these features appear masculine. There's also a smudge on the bridge of her nose. Is this a shadow? We don't know. It seems to be blocking her vision. And what's in the background? It's almost like a second veil in the painting. It looks like a stream of water. It could be a translucent curtain. Sometimes I look at this and I see a bridge in the background. And one thing we say in the art museum is the more you look, the more you see. And this is really so with this curtain or whatever it is in the background. But what's easy to see here is that there seems to be a lot of mystery. Personally, what I love about this work of art, especially, is that eye sort of looking at us. I think it really makes the painting. And I wanted to end looking at this painting with a quote from Monet. He says, "I paint what I see and not what others like to see," which I think is very indicative of this work of art. So moving on, we're going to talk about Edward Degas. Degas was born in Paris to a wealthy family in 1834. He was a sculptor and a painter, and he's often identified with the subject of dance. Over half of his works depict dancers. He went to law school due to the expectations of his father, but his true love was art, and he eventually studied in Paris at the École des Beaux-Arts. And he was highly influenced by Monet and his commitment to contemporary subject matter, and is regarded as one of the founders of Impressionism. But he preferred to be called a realist or a classical painter of modern life. He didn't paint outdoors as did most Impressionists, and his use of pastels, which this is, shows his interest in expressive color. The Dreyfus Affair exposed Degas' anti-Semitic leanings, and after this, most of his artist friends broke with him. So this painting is The Morning Bath. It's a pastel created in 1886. We see a full-figured woman occupying the height of the picture plane, really from top to the bottom, facing away from us, the viewer. Her legs are squarely planted as she stretches her back with her hands on her butt. And we see her unmade bed. She has just woken. You also can see a lot of the horizontal lines, some of the vertical lines, and also these meshed lines sort of at the left side of the painting. So what about that vertical strip? It seems to sequester the bather in her space, and it sort of lets us know that we're on the outside of the scene, almost like we're voyeurs here. And this depiction of a woman bathing is an antidote, really, to some of the cliched goddesses and nymphs popularly portrayed at the time. You know, we can think about this as Degas dancers, very beautiful. But she's realistic, she's unidealized, and she's not at all engaged with us. She has no clue that we're looking at her. The work was perceived by many to be vulgar, but what it really is it's an unbiased look at a real woman at ease in her own space, comfortable in her body, natural in her movement. And I have a quote from Degas. Degas says, "A painting requires a little mystery, some vagueness, and some fantasy." So we're now going to look at our first Jewish artist. And this is Camille Pissarro. And I didn't know a lot about him, but it was very interesting. He was a Danish, French, Jewish Impressionist artist. He was born in 1830 in St. Thomas, and he studied and he worked in Paris. And he was known as the Dean of the Impressionist painters because he was the oldest of this group of aspiring artists, and also because of his kind and warm personality. He inspired the Impressionist Renoir as well as the Post-Impressionists, including Cezanne and Van Gogh. He showed his work in the Paris Salon, the official body whose academic traditions dictated the kind of art that was acceptable. The Salon was also the only real marketplace for young artists, and he was influenced by Corot to paint largely landscapes, and outdoors. So this is a rare painting, a painting of a still life by Pissarro. But this still life was done in 1872, and it's called, what else then? Apples and Pears in a Round Basket. Clearly, it was painted indoors. So what we see here is we have a round basket of fruit resting on a table that's covered in a tablecloth. The background wall is covered in a floral patterned wallpaper, giving the painting a real decorative flourish. And the painting here is very geometric. We have rectangles, we have ovals, we have circles, we have triangles. If you look at the wallpaper, the basket, and the tablecloth in front. And the basket is very close to the edge of the table. So this very simple work is very carefully organized. And this is one of those paintings that the more I look at it, the more I like it and can appreciate the different elements in the work of art. You can see the basket is resting between two sharp creases in the tablecloth, while the lines of the wallpaper, the vertical lines, connect seamlessly with the lines created by the tablecloth's iron folds. But there are some imperfections. The basket has an irregular shape. It's not perfectly round, and the basket can barely contain all of the fruit. That pear on the right side looks like it's about to jump out of the basket. So typical of Impressionist paintings, the brushstrokes enhance the form being depicted. We see the directional touches of pigment modeling the rounded forms of the fruit and also the weave of the wicker basket. You'll see in the wicker basket, the brushstrokes are going largely up and down in the basket itself. We also see short vertical strokes of white and gray in the foreground, which follow the drop of the tablecloth from the edge down to the floor. And there's also a balance of color in the composition. We have an orange fruit in the center of the basket, picking up the peach color of the blossoms and the background wallpaper, while these little purplish accents seen in the basket complement the gray-violet tones in the tablecloth shadow. So there's a lot of balancing going on here, and Pissarro really sought harmony in all of his paintings. So there's a little bit of symbolism here. The round basket is overflowing with ripe, colorful fruit, indicating fullness and abundance. And at this time in his artistic life, Pissarro had begun to make a profit from selling his work. The saleability of still life at this time, which was a very commercially popular genre, may have been part of Pissarro's motivation in painting this and other still lifes, rather than his typical landscape paintings. And Pissarro also has a beautiful quote. He says, "Blessed are they who see beautiful things in humble places where other people see nothing." And I think that's what he's really showing us. This is a humble table in a home, and he sees beautiful things and he paints beautiful things. Okay, we're going to move on to an artist named Alfred Sisley. And he was born in 1839 in Paris. And Sisley was born to affluent British parents, but he made his home and he was raised in Paris. And he was a contemporary of Monet. And if you know Monet's work, you can see that it resembles Monet's work in both the style and the subject matter. And Sisley was the most consistent of the Impressionists in his dedication to painting landscape en plein air or outdoors. This painting is called Riverview, and it's a riverside southeast of Paris. And you can see the broken brush strokes. You can see the brush strokes in the sky. You can see in the trees on the left, the little dabs of color. And in the foliage in the front and the right, you can see that the brush strokes take on a little horizontal curve, just like the foliage would. And I also see in the left side a little red dot, and maybe that's a little robin, I don't know. But he's really exploring color and light, as does Monet. We see some of the wispy clouds, which introduce some movement. And I want to use an acronym. I want to tell you about the acronym ELBOW. We use this to describe Impressionism. and it's elbow like the elbow in your arm. And E stands for everyday subject. And this is, a river view, an everyday subject. L alludes to light, and the Impressionists were very focused on the light they painted with. They painted in all different types of light. Broad brushstrokes were typical of Impressionism. That's the B in elbow. And you can, in most Impressionist paintings, you can actually see the brushstrokes, as you can here. Outdoors is the O. They painted mostly outdoors. And W is for weather. Many artists would paint the same scene over and again at different times of day and in different weather. Probably the best example of this might be Monet painting the bridge at Giverny. People see our Monet's bridge that we have in the museum and they always say, "Oh, I've seen that before." And you probably have, because it's been painted many times in different kinds of weather, in different kinds of light, and in different seasons. So Cicely says, "Light and color are my greatest tools in capturing the essence of a landscape." And I think that you can see that right here. Okay, I'm going to move on to the highlight for Henry Pearlman, which is Cezanne, Paul Cezanne. Paul Cezanne was born in Aix-en-Provence in the south of France in 1839. He was a French post-impressionist painter, and he really bridged the gap between 19th century Impressionism and 20th century Cubism. His use of color, line, and form, along with his bold brushstrokes, influenced generations of artists, and some would have called him the greatest artist of his time. And he was more interested in capturing the essence of the harmony of nature and how something made him feel versus painting realistically. He altered conventional views of perspective and broke established rules of academic art by emphasizing the underlying structure of objects in a composition. You can see here, he used planes of color and small brushstrokes that built up to form much more complex fields. Now, Cezanne was the son of a banker, and his authoritarian father enrolled him in law school. While Cezanne studied painting in the evenings, he eventually left Aix-en-Provence for Paris in 1861 and eventually reconciled with his father. He also eventually returned to paint in the south of France, and he was influenced by Pissarro, as well as by some of the other realists like Courbet and Delacroix, who thought art should depict everyday life. His work was first shown in what's known as the Salon des Refugiés, and this was set up for those who had been rejected from the Paris Salon, which was the art market that focused on traditional academic art. And one of the main features of that is they focused on line versus color, and they focused on realism. Cezanne wasn't necessarily liked by all of his fellow artists. Edward Manet called him a mason who paints with a trowel. But Cezanne's style of art was an inspiration to Pablo Picasso, and I think you can see the connection in the planes of color in the work of both artists. So this is Mont Sainte-Victoire, which is in Aix-en-Provence in southern France. It's an oil painting. It was done in 1904, and it's very dense. And this is the view from the heights near Cezanne's studio. We see vertical lines, we see horizontal lines, we see lots of washes of color. I see a bird in the sky, lots of clouds. It's almost like a mosaic of color that's going from green to blue, from green to yellow, and the colors seem to transition into each other. And you can see the planes, the volumetric planes in this painting, how he's built them up. And it's the diffused light also, which brings everything sort of together. And one thing I want to point out in the front of the painting, I don't have a pointer, so I can't point. But if you look, you see little red blots, and you see the red roofs of some of the buildings in the village. And this is important because it helps us to focus on the painting. It sort of brings us in. And if you put your finger in front of those red roofs, I think the painting will look a lot different. It looks a lot different to me It looks a lot plainer without those very small elements of the red roofs. The red roofs really seem to make the painting pop. So they're not random, they really do make a difference here. So again, you might think you've seen this painting before, and you likely have, as Mount Saint Victoire was painted many times by Cezanne during different times of the day, which would change the lighting, and he also painted this from many different angles. So I see this painting as sort of divided into three distinct areas. We have the foreground represented by this wash of sort of tan color, and this is where his studio was. He was painting from his studio. We have the midground, which features the valley and the town, and we have the background, which is Mount Saint Victoire itself and the sky. So let's put ourselves in this painting. What sounds do you think you might hear here if you were in this painting, in this scene? Since we're online, you can't answer me, so I'll answer what people have said. You might hear birds singing. You might hear the rustling of the trees. You might hear the wind blowing. And what might it smell like to be in this painting? Well, it might smell like the woods. You might smell the paint itself that he's using to create this. And if it's late spring, you might be lucky enough to smell the lavender in the area. And it was luck that brought this work of art to Henry Pearlman, because he was in a gallery when it was offered to another collector. And being the deal maker and the businessman he was, he negotiated his way in and he purchased the painting. So I have another Cezanne I want to show you. And this is Provençal Manor by Cezanne, or A House in Provence. So this is another painting that has grown on me as I've looked at it more. And you can see sort of the interplay between the sharp, crisp edges of the architecture in the buildings and the gentle rolling hillsides in the background. And there's a lot of harmony between the colors. We see the greens and the oranges, the violet hues, again heightened by the reddish roof on the buildings. There's a very well-defined foreground, middle ground, and background again, and the painting seems very balanced. Interestingly, some of the canvas is blank in various sections of the painting. To me, the painting looks a little unfinished, which leads to the question, when is a painting completed? And the answer has to belong to the artist. It's when they put their paintbrush down and say it's done, when their vision is complete. And this was the completion of Cezanne's vision when he was painting Provençal Manor. And Cezanne says, his quote is, "Painting from nature is not copying the object, it is realizing one's sensations." So painting for him was really an emotional experience. Okay. So I wanted to do a little comparison here. And this is between the Pissarro and the Cezanne. And in many ways, they're very different. We have a still life, we have a landscape, we have some similar colors, some different colors. So I was trying to think, what is it that made me want to compare these together? And I think they're both very balanced. I think that the Pissarro on the left is just centered beautifully. It has contrasting colors that go well together, and that basket is very inviting. And I notice the same thing when I take a look at the Cezanne on the bottom right, that the building is centered, it's sort of off kilter a little bit. But I just think that they resemble each other in many ways, and they're different from each other in many ways. And I want to talk about color for a minute because, the reading I've done has identified a lot of these colors as a purple. And we see different colors, because we have different, whatever they are of vision. I always see gray, when people are saying purple, and sometimes brown. So our perceptions of even the colors can be different.
Sandy,
Yeah.
before moving on, I know there are a few questions that came in about the Cezanne. And
Okay.
I wasn't sure if you wanted to address them now.
Sure. Yeah. If I know the answers, yeah.
Sure. Well, one person asks, and I think you were starting to address this concept about the Provencal manor, is that why does it look unfinished?
Okay, let me go back to that. Okay, and this is just my perception. To me, it looks unfinished because I see if in the large manor, I see like the scribbles in the background that he might have, you know, sort of drawn with a pencil before he actually did his painting. I also see that part of the canvas is bare. This part of this is a bare canvas rather than something that's painted. So that's what looks unfinished to me. But that's my perception. One thing we also say about art is that it's very subjective. People come from different backgrounds, they see different things. To somebody else, this could look very complete. I think it looks incomplete, but I think it's very beautiful. And what strikes me about it the most is how balanced it is.
Somebody goes on to ask if this is a watercolor.
You know, I'm not sure. I think it's an oil paint. Everything except for the Degas was an oil painting.
Okay. All right. And somebody does ask about the blank spots, which I think you addressed.
Yeah,
In
that's
your
my perception. You may have a different perception, which in art is absolutely fine. I will also say never ask a question that has a definite answer, because what I'm always looking for is what people think and what other people see, which could be much different than what I see, especially in art that becomes a little bit more abstract. Anything else?
That's it for now, but I just want to welcome folks to put questions in the chat if they have them.
Okay. Okay, so this is Van Gogh's Tarascon. And if you had been in the Princeton University Art Museum, this was certainly one of the highlights of this collection that was on loan from the Pearlmans. And it's Tarascon, or a stagecoach at Arles, which is in southern France, a little bit west of Aix-en-Provence. And it was painted in one afternoon while Van Gogh was awaiting the arrival of Gauguin in the south of France. And it was purchased from a South American dealer and had been hidden in a bank vault in Uruguay. And I don't know what it is, but I'm sure that there's a story there. So here we have a stagecoach parked in a courtyard. And what time of day do we think it might be? And well, let's look at some of the hints we have. The shutters are closed on the buildings, both in the foreground and the background. We don't see any people around on this stagecoach. And it might be time for a nap or for a siesta. They might have eaten lunch and the people might have gone on to take their naps. And the foreground here is very empty. The brush strokes are really thick and we can see them. Some are cross-hatched, and some of this painting might be unpainted also, but it would be much less than the prior paintings we looked at. And the colors are very bright. We see the red, we see the blue, the green, the yellow, the really bright blue in the background. And the perspective is very well defined. We can clearly understand what's in the foreground, this large stagecoach, and what's in the background from the size of the objects in the painting. And the objects in the painting are like the brushstrokes, which are horizontal, they're vertical, they're angular. The objects are very angular and geometric. I see rectangles here, I see triangles, and even in those round wheels on the stagecoach, I see triangles and I see lines, very straight lines rather than circles. So Van Gogh was a post-impressionist painter. He was more inclined than the impressionists to geometric shapes, to the use of bold colors, somewhat arbitrary colors, and I think you can really see that here. And what he rejected was the Impressionist focus on naturalism. And he also captured moods by working very quickly and very intensely. It's said that he finished this painting when he was waiting to meet with Gauguin later in the day. So he finished it in one day. Very different than many artists of the time. So what does this look like? To me, it looks like two stagecoaches conversing, a little bit reminiscent of the movie Cars, if you remember that. So what Van Gogh said, a work of art which did not begin in emotion is not art. So he was very focused on emotions. So let's talk about Chäim Soutine. And he was the artist who started Henry Pearlman's avocation as a collector of art. Soutine lived from 1893 to 1943. He was Jewish, born in Russia, and he studied, painted, and lived in Paris. And his work is characterized by sweeping brushstrokes that distorted reality. You can see those brushstrokes here. We see horizontal brushstrokes, vertical brushstrokes, diagonal brushstrokes. If you look at his face, it's just one brushstroke after the other. He was influenced by Van Gogh's brushstrokes, whose work he did not like, as well as by Cezanne. So this is Soutine's self-portrait, and he painted it in 1918 when he was about 25. And it has a very bright palette. We see many colors, including the primary colors of red, yellow, blue. We see lots of gray in here, some white, some black. And those full cherry red lips really make the painting pop. If you put your finger over the lips and you just imagine what you might think of as a less cherry red lip, you can see that the painting would look quite different. So it's sort of where my eye goes to, those cherry red lips, and goes out from there. And again, you can see the brushstrokes. And his posture is upright, his chin is raised, and he has a stern gaze. He's looking right at us, sort of denoting some confidence, some accomplishment. He's professional looking and serious. And this self-portrait was done at the time of early success, his success. And this savvy artist was really trying to attract buyers by adapting his self-image to that of his patrons. He did not typically wear a suit jacket. He did not typically comb his hair like that. We can also notice his crooked ears and his crooked tie. And the boundaries here are very clear between what's in the foreground and what's in the background. And presumably at the left is that portrait he's painting of himself. And then there's some, brown squiggly lines at the left. I'm not quite sure what that is. So this is another painting by Soutine. It's called A Portrait of a Woman. It was done in 1929. And the colors here are dark and light. And again, I see a lot of different shapes here. I see the triangle near her neck. I see the squareness of her body, the oval of her face. And her neck has many shades of white and yellow, and her face shades of pink, and a little bit of red in her hair. And those red lips again make the painting pop a little bit. This woman does not seem to be making eye contact with us. She's not looking at us. Rather, it seems to me that she's sort of looking through us. And I get a great feeling of sadness here, largely from her furrowed eyebrows and the shape of her eyes. She's also holding those very large hands together. And the body language denotes sort of a feeling of introspection, some reticence, some inaccessibility, themes of alienation, which sort of go with Soutine's personality. He was an alienated character. But the portrait's emotional and it creates a mood. Even the background is dark and amorphous. And there's no setting. We don't know where we are. There's no real background. There are no accoutrements to give us any hints of what's going on. So there's no information to deduce anything about her really than her sadness. Soutine liked to paint strangers, largely from the lower and working class, and his sitters are centered, She's centered in this painting. She's positioned from the front and mostly from the waist up. So I couldn't find any quote from Soutine, but I did find a quote from a woman named Hannah Orloff about Soutine. And what she said was, Soutine painted rapidly. He nurtured his idea for several months, and then when ready, the painting started in fury. He worked with passion, with fever, in a trance, sometimes to the music of some Bach fugue that he played on a phonograph. Once he finished the painting, he was weak, he was depressed, he was wiped out. This took everything out of him to do these paintings. It was a very emotional experience for him. And Chäim Soutine was very good friends with Amedeo Modigliani. And Modigliani was born in 1884 and he died in 1920. He was born to a bourgeois Jewish family, can't say that too many times, in Livorno, Italy. And Livorno was a Mediterranean port city, which was a refuge for those who had been persecuted for their religion, and it was home to a large Jewish community. He was the fourth child in his family, and his birth coincided with the collapse of his father's business. As a child, Modigliani had multiple health issues. He had pleurisy, he had typhoid fever, he had tuberculosis. Encouraged by his mother, someone's talking to me, encouraged by his mother, he took up painting and he enrolled in art studies. And at the age of 22, he moved to Paris to pursue an artistic career. Now, Paris at that time was the focal point of the art world. The atmosphere was collaborative. There were communal studios. There were cafe meetings. There was knowledge sharing. There were lots of non-Parisians. Not surprisingly, many of the artists were poor. Modigliani originally presented as the son of a wealthy man with a dapper dress. He had a stylistic studio. He disparaged Picasso, who was recognized as a genius by his peers for his uncouth appearance. But within a year, Modigliani became an alcoholic. He became a drug addict, and perhaps he was trying to mask his tuberculosis, which few knew of. And at that time, tuberculosis was the leading cause of death in Paris, and it was communicable. There was no cure, and those who had it were ostracized from their communities. And Modigliani thrived with camaraderie. The drink and drugs eased physical pain and helped him maintain a facade of reality. Sadly, he died destitute of tuberculosis at the young age of 35. So Modigliani was originally a sculptor. He was a disciple of the sculptor Brancusi, and he moved to painting as it was too difficult and too expensive to acquire sculpting materials with the outbreak of the war. And this is a portrait of the writer Jean Cocteau, done by Modigliani in 1916. It's actually painted over another portrait, and reuse of canvas was not uncommon because of the rarity of canvases, the expense of the canvas. And Cocteau here is sort of looming over the viewer. The portrait is 3/4 view, it's frontal, and it really emphasizes the facial planes. It's angular, it's almost cubist. Again, I'm looking at shapes. I see triangles in his face. I see rectangles. The neck is very long and the head is elongated. The eyes and the eyebrows are on two different levels, and there's a distinct bump in his nose. And again, we see those small red lips, which we've seen in other paintings, which are pursed. This portrait has a formal feel. He's wearing a suit. He has a handkerchief in his pocket. His hands are resting on his lap. He is clearly posing for the artist. Cocteau was known to be very vain, and you can see that here. He sort of has the look of elegant self-satisfaction. But Cocteau didn't like this portrait, and he thought it looked like Modigliani, and he rejected it when it was presented to him by Modigliani. So I would ask you, and then I'll answer it, does it remind you of anything? And the shape of the face is inspired by African masks, which were very inspirational to many of the artists at that time. And some say the prim expression reminds them of American Gothic. And a quote from Modigliani is, "When I know your soul, I will paint your eyes." It's pretty interesting. So I mentioned that he was a sculptor. This is one of Modigliani's sculptures, which he did before he started painting. I think you can see the similarity. The elongated features, the long face, the long neck, you know, the pursed lips. Definitely a Modigliani sculpture. And I want to make one more comparison. Okay, this is the Soutine on the left, the Modigliani Cocteau on the right. And again, if I think about how are they similar, they're very geometric. I see a lot of triangles in both. I see their hands. I see the shape of their shoulders, very square. And how are they different? The backgrounds are very different. The Modigliani actually has a background. The Soutine does not. And the affect is very different. Her eyes and her eyebrows make her look very sad. She has just a sad look to her. And his eyebrows and his eye and his position, I think, make him look a little bit cocky. So very different. So that's Soutine and Modigliani. And that brings me at 7:48 to the end of my presentation. And before we ask any questions, I will say that I would love to do this in person next year at the museum in smaller groups. And then I'll ask you questions and you can answer and share your thoughts about various works of art.
Well, Sandy, thank you so much. This was terrific. I think it all gave us a taste of what's
Yeah.
in the Pearlman collection. Somebody asked the question, and you probably touched on this, but if you could kind of re-summarize what distinguishes Impressionism versus Post-Impressionism.
Okay, I thought somebody would ask that. Well, Impressionism is reflected by the acronym ELBO, and I'll repeat that because it's important. It's an everyday subject, the use of light, broad brushstrokes, outdoors, and weather, all different kinds of weather. And Post-Impressionism uses bolder colors. It's more focused on geometric shapes, so to speak. But, it also blends. I mean, there are some people who we would call impressionists. They think they're post-impressionists. So it's also over a very small period of time. It's not a huge period of time. But we think of impressionism and post-impressionism as sort of on the way to cubism, if that answers the question.
It's helpful. It's helpful. And my question I have, and maybe you touched on this at the very beginning when you were talking about Henry Pearlman, is there any connecting theme of what he was attracted to as he was building his collection?
Well, he loved Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. He had no interest in history paintings. He had no interest in really abstract paintings. And he wasn't an art historian, and he really bought what he loved. Um, and he, was kind enough to loan this collection. But while he was alive, he would have paintings such as these in his office so he could look at them. And he's have them on the walls of his home so he could look at them. He just was a real art lover. And he also thought that anyone could be an art lover. It didn't take someone to have a certain type of knowledge to have a love of art. And he was a very good example of that. Bought what he loved and loved what he bought.
That's great. It's very inspiring.
Yeah.
I think I'll ask one more time. Does anybody have a question they want to throw into the chat? There was one comment about the stagecoach from Van Gogh where somebody said they could see a person sitting in the I think the second stagecoach.
Oh, right here. Yeah, it could be. Again, we all see different things. And also, I've probably looked at this 100 times, and on the 101st time, I'll see something different. So, Might be a person in there.
Well, let's see. Here is one more question. Does the museum own this collection now?
No, this is on loan, um, temporary. It's right now, it's in the museum in Aix-en-Provence. So we don't own it. It's a very generous loan that we've had since 1974.
It's a long time loan.
Yeah, it's a long time loan. We don't know if it'll last, but for now it's a long time loan. Yeah. I mean, why do people loan art? One of the reasons, I mean, they want other people to see and appreciate it, but also the insurance for fine art that's highly valued is very expensive, and you have to have the right kind of heating and air conditioning system to protect the art, which museums have, which, ordinary people's homes probably don't have.
Very true.
Yeah.
Well, Sandy, I know we're a few minutes shy of 8, but we really appreciated this glimpse into the Pearlman collection, and hopefully we'll see it back in the museum when the museum opens, maybe later this year or
Well,
early
you'll
next
definitely
year.
definitely see art in the museum, that's for sure.
Yes,
When it
yes,
opens later
yes.
this year. Yeah. Okay, thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, well, we appreciate this so much. For those of you who, actually, I'm seeing Don ask a quick question before I do concluding remarks. It says, can you tell us a bit about other Jewish artists at the museum?
Hi, Don. You know, we have some Chagalls. I don't have a list of other Jewish artists that we have. We have a lot of contemporary artists, many of whom are Jewish. Saul LeWitt comes to mind, but I don't have a compendium of who they are.
All right, a good research project for
Yeah,
Don.
yeah. Go for it, Don.
All right. Well, thank you, Sandy, for sharing your time, your knowledge, and your reflections with us. We're grateful once again to the Federation for co-sponsoring. We have recorded this program, so if you'd like to listen again or recommend that a friend listens, it will be posted to the Jewish Community Foundation website this week, so you can take a peek. And I just wanted to promote 2 upcoming programs. One is on March 25th. We're going to have a Zoom webinar launching the virtual Book of Life that the foundation is hosting on behalf of the community. It's a digital gallery that honors all the stakeholders in our community who have fulfilled a life and legacy promise benefiting a Jewish organization in our community. So we welcome you to come and take a peek at the digital Book of Life. It really is the culmination of our life and legacy program where we honor the people who have fulfilled these amazing commitments. Also, in early April, on April 7th, we're going to have an in-person event at Adith Israel in Lawrenceville. It's entitled Through the Eye of the Needle. It's a short film and Q&A about a Holocaust survivor who reflected on her experiences through her needlework. And we'll be seeing both visuals of the needlework, and we'll be talking to the survivor's daughter, who has worked to promote her mother's artwork to educate about the Holocaust and ways of reflecting on the survivors' experiences. And lastly, you can learn more about the foundation and the Federation on our respective websites. So please think of us as a resource in the community, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you for coming.